It's finally time for us to put all of these together into a single piece. So we are going to be doing a monogram in the center and a wreath on the outside. Now you can choose which you want to start with and which one you want to do after. I think I will start with the monogram on the inside and then the wreath on the outside. That way you can sort of build the wreath in to fit around your monogram. Now, before you head into any of that, you sort of want to visualize it. Think of how thick your wreath is going to be. And because we have lots of foliage to add, it's not going to be super thin. It's not one of those spindly little wreaths. So your letter in the center actually can't be very large. You want to have your paper cut to be your final size. Don't have it a little bit extra because it's very likely then you're going to go over the edge. So if you want to have this as an 8x10 eventually, you want to already have it as an 8x10 now. I have a 9x12 sheet because I'm going to put this up on the wall without a frame, but it's much easier to find an 8x10 frame, so keep that in mind if you're wanting to frame this eventually. Now your very first step is to mark off your outer borders. You don't want to go right to the edge. Otherwise, if you do frame it, it's going to be very difficult to frame, and having that white space on the outside is just as important as having your beautiful painted elements further in. So let's mark off about an inch approximately from either edge on your more narrow orientation. It's very unlikely that you're going to go all the way to the top and the bottom, but instead of marking 1 inch up, because we want this to be a circle, consider how wide your page is. Mine was 9. If I take an inch off each side, that leaves me with 7 side to side. Your circle, you're going to want to have it the same side to side as it is up and down. So if my piece of paper was 12 and I want to get down to 7, I'm going to have to take about 2.5 inches off of each side. So you can just eyeball out, if you're comfortable eyeballing out, about 2.5 inches from the top and the bottom. And then you have your basis for your circle. The first thing you want to do is lightly sketch in your circle. These guidelines are great because they are your outer points of your circle. You can fill it in, and of course your circle does not at all have to be perfect. And why not? Because it's a wreath. It's not going to be absolutely perfect. But this is giving yourself your outer border, and now you want to give yourself an inner border. I would say about 2 inches in from each of those points. Put a little mark, and that is your inner border for your wreath. And again, you can just roughly sketch it in because this is a suggestion of your border. It's not a hard and fast line. So now we have our area for our letter, our area for our wreath, and we can get started. You're not going to sketch in too much on your wreath other than your stick guidelines. And when you're creating your wreath, you want to keep in mind the idea of odd numbers. If you were to do 4 quadrants and have the same things repeating in each quadrant, it's going to look very symmetrical both ways. Instead, we want this to look very natural. So you either want to do 3 points on your wreath, and I would even say don't do like a perfect triangle where the point is either on the top or the bottom, but have it be so that your triangle is tilted one way or another in your wreath. So 3 points like this to help the eye move through the wreath, or even doing 5 points. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 throughout your wreath. Those will be your main focus points then for your florals. I'm going to go, I think, with a visual triangle because we have so many types of foliage that I know I'll be able to fill 1/3 of the wreath with using just these. So if you are choosing to just use 1 or 2 of the types of foliage, you're going to want to break this into 5 portions. But if you're going to use all of it and mix it together, you can get away with using 3 portions of your wreath. So thinking of this now in thirds, we'll fill this in with 1 of each of these. On the center here, you're going to put your monogram. Now, that is what I'm going to start with. Of course, if you'd prefer to start with your wreath, you can, but just sketch in the letter that you want to do in the center And then you're going to paint that in using the technique of your choice from our letters lesson, where you use paint and water, use 2 different colors, or use 2 different colors and water. After you've sketched in your letter, you want to give it a light erase, because as soon as you add your water and your paint, it's going to set your pencil into your page and it will be tough to erase. So with a white eraser, just lightly erase it so that you can still see the suggestion of it, but it's not going to determine exactly where your lines go. Something like that is perfect. I almost think of it as it sort of being a bit of a ghost in the background. All right, with your 2 colors, any 2 colors you would like, you are now going to paint in your letter using the style of your choice. I'm going to do the water meetup in the center with 2 different colors. So I think that it would look really beautiful to have a really vibrant saturated blue up at the top, and then blend down into the orange red. Now, because this is a large letter and I know it's going to take quite a bit of work, it can be best to just do little portions at a time. So for instance, this side of the letter, and then move on to the other. That way nothing will accidentally dry before you can get to it. So blend that edge of the blue out by pulling down, and with clean water and a clean brush, continue to blend it down until you hit that no man's land where it's just a suggestion of the color. Now here, I left some space in the middle of the letter because I didn't want the orange to overwhelm. I'm even going to push it back a little bit still. It's just so saturated, and I want it to be a nice gentle meeting of the 2 colors. So then you can start to blend your colors out, blending that orange out, continuing to lift some of the color off as well so that it's not too saturated. And then finally allowing the 2 colors to meet and blending in the center so that you don't have any lines happening. Now you'll notice that the bottom of my letter is thicker than the top, and that very often happens because you're essentially cobbling it together. So you can always go in and just add a little bit more to the top. I like to not just paint the extra side, but go through the whole technique again to ensure that it's a really nice, even blend and looks like it was all created at the exact same time. Nice rocket pop letter here. So giving it that neutral no man's land with lots of water and very little color as the 2 colors meet up. There's a bit of a line happening with the orange, so you can just add in a little bit more color at the base and then pull that color up for a more natural blend happening in the no man's land. Now we have to also go sideways here with this neutral lack of color. And the way that you want to do that is determine which color you want to be primary. For example, this one, the curve of the A curves up. So dabbing just a little bit of the blue up in the corner after painting the space in already allows you to get a very gentle bleeding of that color down into the area. This way you're not accidentally overwhelming it with color, and you can even continue that. It's such a very faint light blue, and then we'll move over to blending out this other side. So this is your upstroke side, and of course, because you're cobbling it together, it's very likely you're going to do it in a downstroke direction, but just remember that it needs to be nice and thin. So we'll do a little bit of color on the top and a little bit of color on the bottom, and then have the 2 meet up. So I even redid the color on the top because I know it was sitting there for a while and I don't want it to be too dry. And especially on these thinner lines, you don't have as much space horizontally to make the color show up, so it is going to have to be a little bit more saturated than your thick downstroke. So I'm not removing quite as much of the color, but still trying to create that neutral zone in the middle where the two colors can meet. And then we'll go over to this side of the cross stroke, and now because I have it curving down, paint your cross stroke in first, put a tiny dot of your color onto your piece, and you can even do a few dots just to build up some more color on there. And then you can go in and very gently blend it out into the water that already exists on your page. Blending all of the colors together in that area. So it's still very light color on the page, but it is definitely there. And then I have a little bit of detail happening down here with the A, and that's just something that can be added straight with the marker. You can go in and add a little bit more saturation with your pen, straight on top if you want it a little bit darker. And there we have the monogram for the center of our piece. Now, before you start adding stuff, especially if you're going to be going across, make sure that it's dry. If you are going to get started on your wreath right away, I suggest starting on an area where you're not going to have to go across your monogram, because it would be terrible if at this point you smudged it. In order to not smudge, I'm going to start on this side of the wreath. Now think about when you build a wreath together. The foliage will follow the direction of the wreath, and so we're going to be doing that same thing here. You want to imagine your third of your wreath, and then let's start with one type of foliage. I would suggest starting with that type of foliage in all three of the sections right away. Now, not just because we learned it first, but also because it's the lightest. Let's start with our first type of foliage that we learned. The reason I want to start with this one is because so often these lighter branches get hidden because you start to add the darker things and then you realize you don't really have space for these ones. But getting this lightness into your wreath is very important. So let's start off with our very lightest type of foliage to make sure that it has a space in there to shine. And it doesn't always even need to be in the same area, but just making sure that in each one of these three sections, you have some of that foliage is going to make sure that it has space to pop. So drawing a really simple line, you're going to want to follow the curve of the wreath. You can draw your other branch coming off of it, maybe even one over here. And they don't always need to be in the center of the wreath either. You can also do it so that they are going towards the edge and having that nice, beautiful brightness right on the edge of your wreath. I like to sketch in all three of them right away. It allows you to make sure that they're not all the same, that the placement's a little bit different, and that it's balanced throughout the wreath. So 3 simple branches, it's still following the direction of the wreath, even though this one sort of goes up. This main line here is still bringing the eye around, and we want that continuous action all the way around the wreath. Now again, just like before we did the monogram, you want to go in and erase it so that you just have your suggestion of your branch. It's not too dark, and you're probably also going to want to lighten up those dots that were showing you your sections of your wreath. You don't want to just smear in case this is still wet. You can do it very gently or use a clean paintbrush and just brush those little bits of eraser off. Turn your page so that you are working down your foliage. That's exactly how we did it when we were doing our small cards of them. Down the foliage and start up towards the top. So for each type of foliage, you're just going to go through and do 3 of them. As you go around your wreath, turn your page and continue just watching out for where your hand may be resting. You might actually want to turn it in the opposite direction to where you would expect. And just pay attention to your hand as you go to ensure that you are not resting on your workspace.